Hi, and welcome back to Programming with Pax. In today's video, we're going to take a deep dive on CSS selectors. We'll start off with the basics, looking at ID and class, and a couple different rules that you need to know of. And then after that, we're going to get a little bit more advanced, and we're going to look at combinator, attribute, and pseudo selectors. We have a ton to cover, so let's get started. All right, so we are in a sample project, and we're just going to start by looking at the HTML. So we've got an interesting title. We've got a div that contains 2 paragraphs with some lorem ipsum, some dummy text, and we have a button, a click me button. So that's what's giving on the right. Now for the CSS, we have nothing in there currently, and I'm actually going to just drag this CSS down onto the bottom here. And we're going to try something different this time. So we're going to try and have it so that you can see the HTML and also the CSS at the same time. So starting at the real basics, the way that you write selectors is you're first going to have a selector name, and then you're going to have some curly brackets, and then in here you're going to have the styles you want to apply. So this is the general format that you're going to always use. Now with that in mind, let's take a look at our first selector. And that is the universal selector. So the universal selector selects every element excluding the before and after pseudo elements. So more on that later. We're going to come back to this. So the universal selector starts with a star. That's your selector. And then you're going to have your curly brackets. And then in here, you're going to have your styles that you want to apply. So let's say color red. And when I save, it is going to change the color, not the background color, just the color, meaning the font, of every element on the page. We could change also, let's say, the margin bottom to 60 or 50 pixels. And when I save, now you can see that every element on the page is going to have 50 pixel margin on the bottom. And if I right click and go to inspect, and in the body, you can now see the orange is being applied to every element. The orange kind of here, that means that there's margin. So 60 margin on everything. Now you're probably thinking, when would I want to apply the same styling everywhere? And the most common use for it is resetting your style's default styling, such as the margin that goes around. Another really common use case is adding box sizing, border box. What this essentially does is change the way that the page calculates the height and the width. If you'd like to know more about this, I released a video all about box sizing, and I'll leave it in the description down below. So that's the universal selector. The next one we're going to look at is HTML element selectors. So with element selectors, what you can do is just use the keyword of any of these HTML tags, and you can style them. So let's say body for the body tag here. Actually, let me just indent these because they should be indented. Perfect. So with the body tag, we can say, let's say font size of 30 pixels. And when I save, now all the text within the body is going to be 30 pixels. So that's just convenient because now you can see it a little bit bigger. Just for the example, you would never actually have font size in your body. Let's keep going. So again, you can just select any element tag that you want. So let's try a P for a paragraph tag. And in here, let's do a background color of, let's say cadet blue. Sure. So now when I save, all of the paragraphs are going to have this cadet blue background. And more realistically, what you might do is you might style your buttons. So all buttons on the page. So let's do a padding of 8 pixels by 16 pixels. Let's do a background color of, what do you want? What are you thinking? Coral. Perfect. So let's do a border of none and a border radius of 4 pixels. And when I save, now you can see this is our new button, and any buttons that we were to make. So if I duplicate this, so I'm holding Option Shift and down arrow, and I can duplicate these buttons. And when I save, now we have the same button styled the same way. And that's because we have styled it through this element selector. Beautiful. All right, so let's look at class selectors next. So to use a class selector, we first have to add the class attribute within the opening tag. And then we do an equals and quotes. And within here, we can add a name for this class. So let's say red text. So now that we've written this class is equal to red text here, we need to actually link the HTML with the CSS. So the way that we select this red text class is by first putting a period and then writing red text. So classes get this period first, and then after that, then we do curly brackets as always. And let's say color red. And if I save, now we have all of the text in here being obnoxiously red on this blue background. So 2 things to point out. The first is that when you write your class name, you're going to want to use kebab case. So that means that there's going to be this hyphen between each of the words. So you're not going to write it what's called camel case. You're not going to do red text. You're not going to do capital R, capital T. You're not going to do either of these. It's always going to be a kebab, like the stick that goes through the food. So there's the kebab stick. And the second thing that I want to point out is that with classes, they can be repeated. So in the opening HTML tag, I can paste it in here. I'm just going to delete a space. And when I save, now this same style is being applied to the H1, the interesting title. So classes can be used multiple times anywhere in your HTML. Up next, we have ID selectors. So just like with class selectors, we first need to link it in our HTML. So in the opening paragraph tag, let's write ID is equal to, and then let's give it a name. So let's say big format. And where a class selector uses this period, an ID will use the hash or £. So then let's write big format and do some curly brackets. And let's say padding of 20 pixels and margin of 20 pixels. And let's save. And now you can see that this ID that I added here onto this second paragraph has 20 pixels margin and also 20 pixels padding. So you can see the 2 lines there. The orange layer that's going around this element is the margin, and the kind of greenish color here is the padding. Now, something to note is that I could copy this ID and put it within another element. Let's say this first button down here. And when I save, you can see that the styling is applied. So it can be used on multiple elements and it will still work. However, that is very bad practice and a big no-no, and it should not be done. So IDs should be unique. Now, in general, I don't use IDs very often, and instead I usually just have a whole bunch of classes everywhere, even if those classes are only used once. That said, IDs exist and you need to be aware of them. All right, finally, for our basic selectors, we have grouping selectors. So let's say if we wanted to add the same styles to multiple elements in our CSS. So we could say, paragraph, some styling, and then all divs get some style. This is really just going to become repeated code. And what we want to do in programming is what's called dry. We want to stay dry, which means don't repeat yourself. So the way around this is that we use grouping. And to group, we write the selector and then we add a comma, and then we write whatever other selector we want after that. So let's say period red text, and then let's do another comma, and let's say hash for the ID. Let's say big format. And then whenever we're done, whenever we're finished kind of grouping whichever selectors we want, then we add the curly brackets, and then we add some styling in here. So let's say border of 3 pixels, solid green, sure. And let's save. You can sort of see, maybe it's not the best color. Let's do orange to be really obnoxious. Perfect. So anywhere we have a paragraph or a red text class or a big format ID, all of them are going to get this orange border. So we can see on the right, all these different places have it, including this button here at the bottom, which has big format on it. All right, so let's look at attribute selectors next. So in the HTML, we have a couple different anchor tags for links, and they have an href attribute, which basically says, when you click on this, go to this website. And then we also have these text areas, which have a couple different attributes in it. The attributes are these lighter blue colors, including this placeholder. And this first one says, tell me a joke. And the second one says, tell me a story. So that's how in the text areas here, you have this placeholder text here. So for attribute selectors, we select by using square brackets. And then within there, we put the attribute that we want to select. So let's put href. And then let's do a curly brackets. And let's see a background color of, what are you feeling? Dark goldenrod, sure. So let's save. And you can now see that all of the anchor tags at the top have this kind of golden background color. And that's because all three of these have an href in there. Now we could be more specific and we could say anchor tags that have the attribute of href that is equal to, and then here we can be, very specific and we say, okay, we only want the Facebook one. So we put facebook.com in there. And let's open the brackets and let's say a background of, let's keep it simple here, blue. Now you can see that it's specifically only selecting the Facebook anchor tag and applying the blue here. Now let's look at these text areas. So how do you think we would select the text area that has a placeholder equal to tell me a joke? You can pause the video for a second if you want and just sort of think about it. And I'm going to explain it now. So the way that you would do it is text area, because that's the element itself, then square brackets, and let's put the attribute we want to select. So just like before, so placeholder is equal to, and then in here we need to have tell me a joke. And let's add some curly brackets, and let's do a background color of red. And when I save, now you can see that the tell me a joke one, which is on the left, has the red background. Now I'm going to take this just a little bit further and show you one other cool thing. So as is, this placeholder is looking for exactly the string tell me a joke. So if I add an E at the end, now this is not matching exactly the one up here. So if I save, now you can see that the red is not applied anymore. So because this is looking for an exact match, we can actually change it so that we can look for just a partial. And the way that we do that, let's change this tell me, which means, as is, if I save, neither of these text areas are getting the style applied, even though both of these text areas have the tell me in them. And what I can do then is add a star symbol, like the universal. And if I save now you can see that the red is applied to both of them, because it's basically saying look for a text area that has a placeholder that at least contains tell me. So it doesn't have to be exact, it just can be a partial. All right, beautiful. So the next selector that we're going to look at is called pseudo classes. A pseudo class is used to define a specific state that an element is in, such as a button when it's hovered over, or a text input when it's focused, sort of clicked on. So in the HTML, we have a button and an input, and in the styles, we just are currently selecting all buttons and we're giving it this gray background and a little bit of padding. And you can see that if I hover over the button currently, nothing happens. So let's change that. So to use pseudo classes, we first type the element that we want to select, and then we do a colon, and then the state that we're wanting. So let's say hover. And in here, let's do a background color of dark green, sure. So let's save, and now if I hover over, now you can see it changes color. So again, that's the element, and then one colon, and then the state that you're wanting. Now let's try it for the input. So this input on the right here, if I select it, I can type some text in there, perfect. Now let's do an input, and I want to select its focus state. And in here, let's do a background of red. Sure. And when I save, now you can see that when I select it and actually focus the input to type something in, the background changes to red. All right, so I've added 6 divs here with the words div in it, so you can see it on the right. And I want to show you one more pseudo class, and that is the nth of type. So let's do the element and then colon and then nth of type. And in here, one of the ways we can use it is by saying odd. And in here, let's do a background color of sea green. And then if I save, now you can see all the odd numbers. So the first, the third, the fifth are all this green color. And I can do the same thing with even as well. So let's say even here, and let's do this one is red because it's simple. Perfect. So now you can see that 2, 4, and 6 all have this red applied. All right, so up next we have pseudo elements. So where a pseudo class is selecting a state, such as the hover or the focus, a pseudo element is a keyword that is added to a selector that lets you access and style a special part of that element. There are quite a few pseudo elements out there, but in this video, we'll focus on one called after. If you're interested in learning more about pseudo elements, I just released a video on it, and I'll link it in the description below. All right, so let's look at the code we have so far. So we have a div here with a class called image, and in the CSS, we have the class being selected with a position relative and a height of 500 pixels and a background with a URL coming from Unsplash, which gives this rhino picture. Now underneath it, I have the pseudo element of it. So I'm going to uncomment it now. Now let's go through the styling before I save. So first we're going to select the element that we want to give the pseudo element to. And then we do 2 colons, where before with pseudo classes, we would have only 1. With pseudo elements, we have 2. And then we have the word after. And inside of the styling, we have the content that's equal to an empty string. This is just a requirement for pseudo elements like before and after. We then have position absolute, which makes it position itself relative to the nearest element which has position relative set on it, meaning the base image itself. And this here just makes it start from the top left and go all the way to the top right and the bottom right and the bottom left. So basically, it will take up the entire space that it can. Next, we have a background image, which is just a linear gradient, so a color of sorts. And then the opacity we have turned down to 50%. Now let's save, and you can see that there's now this gradient color being applied over top. So pseudo elements are excellent options to add a color layer over top of it or some effect. Now, I said before that with pseudo elements, which is the thing that we first looked at, that it applies box sizing to everything except for pseudo elements, like before and after. So the way that we get around this is we add a comma, and then let's add the star again for universal, and 2 colons, and let's do before. And then let's also do the same thing for after. So by writing it like this, you're essentially saying to apply whatever styling to everything, including before and after pseudo elements. All right, now we're going to look at a selector that's a bit more advanced, and that is Combinator Selectors. So a Combinator Selector essentially uses a special symbol or character to combine 2 different selectors, which in turn gives a new selector. So before we dive into them, let's look at the code we have so far. So I've got a div here with a class called parent, and inside of there, I have a couple different child paragraphs. So these elements are children of the parent. And then we also have this div here, which is still a child element of this first div. However, this paragraph is a grandchild of this parent. And then we have a couple divs here that are siblings to the parent, because they're in line with it. I've added a little bit of styling just to make things hopefully clearer. So I gave all of the divs a blue outline and a little bit of margin so that there's spacing between them. Now for this, I'm selecting everything that's within the parent, give it a margin on the left of 30 pixels. So that's just giving it this indent. And the idea is that it's kind of the same as the indents that are within the code itself, just so to sort of help you see that these are children and this is a grandchild. And finally, we have all paragraph tags that are within the parent having this color of red. So that's why these are red. All right, so there are 4 combinator selectors, and those are descendant, child, adjacent sibling, and general sibling. Let's start with descendant combinator. So with descendant combinators, the symbol or character that we use is a space. So I'm putting the character within brackets here. There's nothing for this one, but that's meant to be a space. So for descendant combinators, we are going to write the outer parent, and then let's do a span with a space in between. And let's add a color of violet, and let's save. You can see now that there's this pink color attached to this span content. And what this is essentially saying is within the parent, look for a span. So within the parent class, look for a span. Now, if I were to copy this, and I'm just going to put it out here, and if I save, obviously it has the same pink color. However, what I can do is be more specific. So I want this span only, not the first one. And so I can say the parent that has a div within it, that has a paragraph within it, that has a span within it. So parent, div, paragraph, span. And if all of this is true, then apply the pink. So if I save now, you can see that this span content no longer has the pink color. I'm going to get rid of this first span, and let's move on. So the next one is called a child combinator, which means that it needs to be a direct child. It can't be a grandchild. So let's test that out. So let's do a dot parent, because we're selecting from the outside. And then for that, we can see that we use this greater than symbol. So let's do greater than and P. And then let's add some styling in there. So color of green. And when I save, now you can see that these child paragraphs are getting the green. However, this paragraph here is still red. And that's because these paragraphs are direct children, and this one is a grandchild. It's within this div, so it's not a direct child of the parent. All right, so up next, we have the adjacent sibling combinator, and that is using the plus sign. So let's do paragraphs plus div, and within there, let's do a background of purple. And let's save. And you can see that this whole div now is having this purple background color applied. So what this is saying is look for divs that have a paragraph sibling immediately before it. So here we have this div, and immediately before it, we have this paragraph tag. So therefore it's true, and this whole div gets the style applied. Let's look at another example just to make sure that this is clear. So let's do div plus div is equal to a background of salmon. Let's save. So again, this is looking for a div that has another div immediately before it as a sibling. So this bottom div looks immediately before it and says, do I have a div? Yes, I do. And then this one does the same thing, which has a div right before it, which has a div right before it. And so that's why these 4 have this salmon color. And the reason that this parent div doesn't have the salmon color applied is because when it looks immediately before it and says, do I have a div sibling? It doesn't. Now, to make things even clearer, let's put a span right in the middle that says hi, and let's save it. And now you can see that this sibling, the second from the bottom one, this one, doesn't have the pink salmon colored being applied to it. And that's because this div here is asking, do I have a div sibling right before it? And the answer is no, and therefore it doesn't get the styling applied. So let's comment that out and save. And now you can see these are all back to pink. Let's move on to the last combinator, and that is called the general sibling combinator. So I'm actually going to comment out this salmon color, just so we're back to where we are. And with the general sibling combinator, which has the tilde as the character, so that's shift plus the key that's just to the left of 1 on your keyboard. So if we do div tilde div, and let's do a background color of sky blue, and let's save. So you can see that it's doing something fairly similar to the adjacent sibling combinator, where it's asking, okay, I'm a div. Do I have a div immediately before? Yes, then apply the styling. However, where the adjacent sibling combinator has the rule of immediately before it, the general sibling combinator is less strict and will simply look all the way up and say, is there ever a sibling div before me? So I can uncomment this span and save, and you can still see there's no break in this second to last div. There's no break in the styling anymore. It'll just simply skip over the span. This div here will say, is there ever another div before me that's a sibling, meaning on the same line? And yes, there is, and so the styling is applied. So I've seen these sibling combinators being used for navigation elements, where you can add margin on one side of the links that are in the navbar, and that margin is added to all of those elements except for the first, because each of the elements will say, do I have an element before me? Yes, perfect, and apply it. And then it continues all the way until the first one, and the first one will say, well, no, I don't have another element before me, and so it doesn't get the styling. It doesn't get the margin on the left, let's say, so it stays nice and flush. All right, so you have made it to the end, just about. So the last one I want to show you is called the not selector. So I have this fancy class, which just adds some golden text shadow. And for these 2 paragraph tags, I have the fancy in there, which is why you're getting this cheesy golden kind of color on these paragraphs. So with a not, we can say paragraph tags that are not, so we use a colon, and then let's add the fancy class in here. And let's add a background of red. So what this is saying is look for any paragraphs that don't have the fancy class on it. And so if I save now, you can see that the 3rd paragraph and also this paragraph that's within here, I guess it's hidden now. There you go. So add the red background styling to those. So again, look for any paragraphs that don't have this fancy class added to it. And that is pretty much everything you need to know about selectors in CSS. Hopefully all of that made sense to you and you're now better equipped at whatever front-end project you want to work on. If you have any questions, however, just let me know in the comment section down below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. I'm also going to leave a link in the description to a complete list of selectors, just in case you're wanting to continue to explore. If you found this video helpful, I would greatly appreciate it if you hit the like button, as it really helps the channel out, and subscribe for more content just like this. On that note, thank you very much for your time. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.